Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on social media and wherever you listen to podcasts. Our current goal is to get to 100 written reviews on the podcast app to help new listeners find us. If you haven't subscribed and written a review yet, please do. We get closer to our goal every week. Your reviews continue to amaze us, and we learn from your feedback as well. So thank you for taking the time to share. This episode is supported by Epic Amounts of Sleep. Tonight, we'll read an excerpt titled A Fish Drive on a Micronesian Atoll from a book of short stories called Rita and the Devil by Louis Beck, published in 1899. Beck was an Australian Pacific trader, short story writer, and novelist. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. We were thrashing our way in a little brigantine owned by Tom DeWolf of Liverpool against the strong northeast trade wind from the Western Carolines to Mealy in the Marshalls, when one day we sighted a low-lying cluster of 5 small palm-clad islands that lay basking, white and green, in the bright Pacific sun. And an hour before dark, the Luna Lilo dropped her anchor just in front of the native village. In a few minutes, the resident trader came off to us in his boat and made us welcome to his island home. We had heard that he had quite a considerable quantity of hawk-billed turtle shell and some coconut oil to sell, and came to ascertain the truth of the report before we were anticipated by some German or American trading vessel. Less than a mile away from where the brigantine was anchored, we saw a noble white beach, trending east and west in many curves, and backed by serried lines of palms and groves of breadfruit trees, through which bright verdancy peeped out the thatch-covered and saddle-backed houses of the natives. Apart from the village, and enclosed by a low fence of growing hibiscus palings, stood the trader's house, a long, rambling building with white coral lime walls and a wide, shady veranda on all 4 sides. In front of the fence was a tall, white painted flagstaff, and presently we saw a woman come out of the trader's house and walk up to it. In another minute, the stars and stripes went slowly up and then hung limp and motionless in the windless atmosphere. There, said the trader with a laugh. "But the fact is that I was so excited when I saw your schooner that I never thought about hoisting the old gridiron. Now, look here, gentlemen, before we do anything else or talk about business, I want you to promise to come ashore tonight. There is going to be a big fish drive, and I can assure you that that is a sight worth seeing." We made the promise, and half an hour later went ashore and walked up to our friend's house. Here we found the entire population of the island assembled to do us honor, and for quite 10 minutes were embraced most effusively by everyone who could get near us. The men were naked to their waists. The missionaries had not then made any headway in the Caroline Islands, around which they wore either gaily colored girdles of bleached and then dyed strips of fine pandanus leaves, or sashes of closely woven banana fiber. The women, in addition to their grass waist girdles, wore a crescent-shaped garment of similar material, which was suspended from their necks and covered their bosoms. Their glossy black hair hung in wavy curls down their backs. Since the advent of the missionaries, this costume has been suppressed. Nearly all the young girls wore narrow head circlets of white pandanus leaves, profusely adorned and embroidered with red and yellow beads, flat pieces of polished pearl shell, and edged with green and gold and scarlet parrot's feathers. Their address and modest demeanor was engaging, and we noticed that they showed the utmost deference and respect to an aged female who sat on a mat in the center of the room, surrounded by a number of young children. She was, we learnt, the king's mother, and at her request, the trader led us over to where she sat and gave us a formal introduction. She received us in a pleasant but dignified manner, and the moment that she opened her lips to speak, the clatter of tongues around us ceased as if by magic, and the most respectful silence prevailed. As neither the captain nor myself were able to speak the local dialect, which is similar to that of Ponape, we were somewhat at a loss to answer the questions she put to us, and etiquette forbade the trader to volunteer his services as an interpreter till the old dame asked him. Presently, however, she desired him to tell us that she was very pleased to see us, that the fish drive would, she hoped, interest us greatly. Then, at a sign from her, a handsome young man who stood in the doorway came forward and laid down a bundle of mats at our feet. This was the old lady's formal present to the captain and myself. She then rose, and bidding us to come and see her in her son's house before we sailed, she walked over to the end of the room, attended by her retinue of children, and sat down again on a finely worked mat, which was spread out before her. Then she made another and another longer speech on behalf of her son, who, she said, had desired her to say that he was very pleased we had brought the ship to an anchor, that his stomach was filled with friendship for us, and that the trader would tell us that all that he, the king, said was true. Also that if any of her people stole even the most trifling article from our ship, they would be severely punished. Furthermore, she trusted that after we had spent one night at the man's house and seen the fish drive, we would spend the following morning with her, when we should be feasted, and every honor and attention shown us. Then the young man attendant produced another present from the king. This was a live sucking pig, a pair of fat Muscovy ducks, and a huge green turtle. This latter was carried in by 4 women and placed in the center of the room. We then, through the trader, made return gifts of a bolt of white calico, a lamp, and a tin of kerosene. Touching these with her hand, the old woman signed to her attendants to take them away, and then, with another polite speech, left the house. The moment the king's mother retired, many more of the common people swarmed into the house, and all seemed highly delighted to learn that we intended to stay and see the great fish drive. As every one of our native crew was very anxious to join in the sport, the captain had asked the king's mother to tapu the ship till daylight, and shortly afterwards we were told by a messenger from the king that this had been done, and that no native would attempt to board the ship till we had returned. At 5 o'clock we were taken to the king's house, where we found the whole population assembled. A great feast was spread out, and King Ralok, who advanced to meet us, took us by our hands and sat us down in the midst of vast collections of baked fish, breadfruit, turtle meat and eggs, and roast fowls, pigeons, and pork. Of course we had to eat, but at the earliest opportunity, the trader told the king that we were anxious to see the preparations made for the drive before it got too dark. Ralok at once agreed, and after drinking the milk of a young coconut to wash down the repast, we made a start for the scene of operations. This was along the shore of the lagoon. At high water, for nearly 2 or 3 miles, the white, sandy bottom would be covered by a depth of about 4 feet of water. At low water, as it was now, it was dry. Here and there were clumps of coral boulders, generally circular in shape, and these, at high water, would be just flush with the surface. These boulders were some 200 or 300 yards apart, and as we came out upon the lagoon beach, we saw that they were connected by a vast number of nets lying upon the sand in readiness to rise by means of their light wooden floats of puka wood, as soon as the incoming tide swept in from the ocean. Upon the top of each of these connecting boulders were piled bundles or long torches made of dried coconut branches. The torches were to be lighted when the drive began. The total length of the netting was about 2 miles, but at one end, that facing the deep water of the lagoon, there was a wide, unenclosed space. Here, however, were lying 6 canoes, whose outrigger platforms were piled up with strong nets, which were to be stretched across the opening at the proper moment. After looking at these preparations, we returned to the village, and as we had no time to lose, and the tide was coming in at a great rate over the reef, we began to dress, or rather undress, for the sport. To each of us was given a spear, and a number of young women and children were told off to accompany us with baskets, with 6 boys as torchbearers. As soon as darkness had fallen, the whole village was astir. From every house men, women, and very young children swarmed, these latter without even the traditional leaf to hide their nakedness, while the grown girls and women, possibly with the view of not shocking us too much, wore short, very short girdles around their loins. The grown men and youth now launched a number of canoes and, crowding into them, paddled out into the lagoon, keeping well away, however, from the line of nets, the floats of which were now appearing upon the surface of the water. In each canoe was a large basket filled with a nasty-looking mass. This was the crushed shells and bodies of uga, or small land crabs, and was to be used as burley to attract the fish to the wake of the canoes. Before going further, I must mention that at a particular season of the year, May, many of the Micronesian islands are visited by vast shoals of fish, much resembling an English salmon. These enter the lagoons from the ocean in pursuit of smaller fish. These smaller fish, which are a species of sprat, assemble in incredible quantities, and at night time are wont to crowd together in prodigious numbers about the coral boulders before mentioned, in the same manner that ocean-living fish will sometimes attach themselves to a ship or other moving substance as some protection from pursuit by bonito, albacore, and the fish called tautau. The latter are of nocturnal habit when seeking food, and during the daytime lie almost motionless near the bottom, where they can often be seen in serried masses. As soon as night falls, they rise to the surface and give chase to flying fish and other surface-swimming ocean fish. In shape, they are very similar to a salmon, but do not possess the same deepness of body and general fullness. Their heads consist of a series of long plates, and their jaws are armed with rows of serrated bone plates. In color, they are very beautiful iridescent silver along the sides and belly, the back and head being a deep, glossy blue. When full grown, their length is slightly over 4 feet, and weight about 25 pounds. They are as voracious as the pike, swim with extraordinary swiftness at nighttime, and will take the hook eagerly if baited with a whole flying fish. Their flesh is somewhat delicate in flavor and greatly relished by the natives of Micronesia, who regard it as second only to the universally esteemed flying fish. 2 or 3 days before we made the little group of islands, immense droves of these tautau, as the natives of eastern Polynesia call them, had been hovering about the reefs, and the people were now to endeavor to tempt them into the trap set for them with such care and labor. For about a quarter of an hour, not a sound broke the silence of the night. We were in the midst of some 300 or 400 natives who only spoke in whispers for fear of alarming the fish. All round the deeper portion of the chain of nets was a line of canoes filled with women and girls, who held torches in their hands, ready to light up the moment the signal was given. Further in towards the shore, where the water was not too deep to prevent them keeping on their feet, were numbers of girls and children standing close together, their bodies almost touching, and the floats of the nets touching their chests. We, with the trader, were standing together with our torch bearers upon a flat-topped coral boulder. Suddenly, a whisper ran along the line of watchers. The canoes were coming. One by one, we made them out, the paddlers dipping their paddles into the water in silence, as one of their number in each canoe threw out double handfuls of the crushed crab burley. As they approached nearer to us, we became aware of a peculiar lapping, splashing noise, as of hundreds of bare feet walking in water a few inches deep. "That's the fish," whispered the trader. "Look at them. They're coming in thousands." And then even our unaccustomed eyes could see that the water behind the canoes was churned into a white froth by the jumping, splashing fish, which were following the canoes in a solid wall, snapping up the food so industriously thrown to them. In a few minutes, the canoes had entered the open end of the trap and were paddling noiselessly past the inner lines of nets, not 100 yards from where we stood. At last, when the whole enclosure was literally swarming with fish, the outside canoes quickly closed up the gap by stretching the nets across it, and almost at the same moment, there was a tremendous splashing and churning up of the water around each knoll and border of coral. The tautau had left off eating the bait thrown them from the canoes and were attacking the myriads of small fish that clustered round the boulders. And then, at a signal given by one of the outside canoes, the torches sprang into flame, and by the bright light that flooded the scene, the most extraordinary sight was revealed. For from one side to the other, the great enclosure was full of magnificent tautau, about 3 feet 6 inches in length. They were all swimming on the surface, and as soon as the blazes of the torches illumined the water, they at once became almost stationary, or, after the manner of flying fish, when subjected to a strong light, swam slowly about in a dazed, hesitating manner. So well had the natives judged of the time it would take to carry out their scheme that within half an hour of the enclosure of the fish the tide began to fall, and the swarms showed signs of anxiety to escape. But as fresh supplies of torches were brought from the village and kept continuously alight, their alarm seemed to disappear. had a heavy shower of rain fallen, so the trader told us, and extinguished the torches, the fish would have rushed at the nets and carried them away by sheer weight. Meanwhile, as the tide continued to fall, many of the women and girls set about stunning all the fish that came within reach of them and loading the canoes with them. Once some 50 or 60 tautau came right up to the boulder on which we stood, and were so dazed by the glare of light that poured down on them that some were able to be captured by hand. Lower and lower fell the water, and as the shore end of the trap became dry, the fish were gradually forced to come closer and closer together as their swimming space diminished. By and by, as the receding tide left the chain of coral rocks dry on their summits, women waded out with firewood and built fires on them. Not that there was now any danger of the fish breaking away, but to give a still better light. At last, however, the word was passed along the line that the sea end of the drive had been strengthened by additional nets in case of a sudden rush. But by this time, so rapidly was the water running out that even at the deepest end, there was not perhaps 2 feet available for the swarms of tautau. In another 20 minutes, there was heard a most extraordinary sound caused by thousands upon thousands of fish thrashing and jumping about on the sand, while at the sea end of the drive, where the great body of all were massed together, the scene was simply indescribable. What little water was left was beaten into froth and foam by their struggles, and the light from the torches showed that a space of about 5 acres in extent was covered with a shining, silvery mass of splendid tautau, intermixed with a small number of gorgeous-hued rockfish, crayfish, and some hawk-billed turtle. The work of picking up the prizes